Okay, guys, pre-calc section 4.4. One of the definitions you guys have been working on is sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Where I'd like to try and push you guys is that when you're on the unit circle, it doesn't work so good when you think of, say you're standing here at 210 degrees. That is negative square root of 3 over 2 negative a half. The whole idea of a hypotenuse should be thrown out the window, because if you're sitting at 210 degrees, how can you possibly have a right triangle with one of the angles being 210? So right away it should just be like, that's just wrong. The hypotenuse is worth 1, and we said when you're on the unit circle, this is exactly the same thing, your opposite side. I think the initial direction I gave you guys was over here at square root of 3 over 2 a half. That meant this side was a half, this side was square root of 3 over 2, and the hypotenuse, because you're on the unit circle, is 1. If I want the sine of this angle, opposite over hypotenuse. So what's your y value over the hypotenuse, which is 1, but if you're on the unit circle, the hypotenuse is always 1, so it's just your y value. Now, where I need to push you, though, is if you're not on the unit circle, if the radius is not 1, this definition doesn't hold, because we assumed the hypotenuse was 1. So if you're not on the unit circle, that's how you would find it. You could also alternatively think of it as y over your radius, if you'd rather think of it as radius. And the key here is it's just the Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus y squared is your radius squared, or x squared plus y squared is your hypotenuse squared. Whichever term you want to call it, it's the same thing. If you're on the unit circle, this is your x. If you're not on the unit circle, 1 second, you guys, I'm going to pause this. Okay, guys, I think I remember where I'm at. So tangent, we figured out earlier, was your y over your x. Now notice it doesn't involve the hypotenuse at all. There's no hypotenuse in it. So whether you're on a unit circle or not on a unit circle, it doesn't matter. It's strictly your y value over your x value. That's all there is to it. It gets no easier than that. Okay. All right. Find the 6 trig functions given this information. Now, you're 4 units left, 5 units down. There's no way this is sitting on the unit circle. There's no way that hypotenuse or that radius is 1. No way. Nope. So how do you find it? Well, or let me back up. The easiest thing, the best thing that I can suggest to you guys when you're doing these is the first thing you should do is write down what is your x, your y, and your h. If you don't like h and want to call it r, that's fine too. But before you do anything else, make sure you have all 3 of these things. And the pattern is just the Pythagorean theorem. So that would be 16 plus 25 is r squared. So what's that? 3141. So this would be the square root of 41. Now, typically when you take that square root, it's going to go plus and minus, right? But it's a radius. It's not going to be plus or minus. It's strictly plus. So square root of 41. Okay? So now that you have these 3 pieces of information, the sine of that angle, and don't draw a triangle in here anywhere. You'll drive yourself crazy if you do that. Sine is going to be your y value over your hypotenuse. And yes, you have to rationalize it. So negative 5 square roots of 41. I know you guys know by now that that's what it is, but it's killing me that it's still doing it. 41 over 41. Cosecant's the reciprocal. Don't flip this one, flip this one. So negative square root of 41 over 5. Cosine is going to be your x value over your hypotenuse. Rationalize it, and you get negative 4 square roots of 41 over 41. Secant is the reciprocal. So again, take the reciprocal of the easier one. Don't do it of the harder one. Okay? Tangent is your y over your x. So negative 5, negative 4. So it's going to be 5/4. Cotangents of reciprocal, 4/5. Pretty easy. If you abandon SOHCAHTOA. If you continue to use SOHCAHTOA, this is going to drive you crazy. Okay? Trying to figure out who's opposite, who's adjacent. Guys, just use the alternate definitions involving the x, the y, and the h. Right? What quadrant are you in if you're given this following information? Okay, sine is your y value. Your y's are less than 0. Okay, well, look at a coordinate grid. That's your y. These are your x's. Your y's are less than 0 in quadrant 3 and 4. So I guess let me back up. Make sure you guys remember what quadrant's which. That's quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So this first piece of information, sine is less than 0, narrows it down to quadrant 3 and 4. Now, the secondary piece of information, cosine, which is your x, it's saying x is greater than 0. That narrows it down to quadrant 4. Okay? You're in this quadrant because your x is greater than 0 and your y is less than 0. Secant is related to cosine. So your x's, or more specifically 1 over x, is less than 0. It doesn't matter that it's a fraction. Who cares? If it's less than 0, the only way this fraction is being less than 0 is if x is less than 0. So x is negative. Where is that happening? It's happening in quadrants 3 and 4. Quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. Oops, sorry. Gosh. Quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Holy cow. Who's teaching this anyways? Quadrant 2, quadrant 3. Now the secondary piece, that's related to sine. So that's saying 1 over y is greater than 0. And the only way you're going to make a fraction positive in this is if this is greater than 0. You can't do it by changing the sign on 1 because it can't change, it's just 1. So y is positive. Well, where is y positive? Y is positive in quadrants 1 and 2. So where is the overlap? Quadrant 2. Okay. Find the sine, cosine, and tangent for the following values of theta. All this is really saying, guys, is look at the unit circle, and you may have to use its period to do it, and we'll talk about that as we go. Its period. 135. So that's the 45 degrees right here. You know that coordinate is square root of 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. Sine is your y value, square root of 2 over 2. Cosine is your x value, negative square root of 2 over 2. Tangent is your y over your x, so y over x, negative 1. Negative 450, okay? So going down is negative, all the way around is negative 360. 90 more is going to plunk you right here. So you're sitting at 0, negative 1. Y value is negative 1, x value is 0. Tangent's y over x, negative 1 over 0. So tangent is undefined. Okay? Yep, and there are other ones underneath it after. I thought there might be more. Negative 3/4 pi. So that's negative pi. Negative 3/4 pi is going to be right here. So you've cut it in fours. 1, 2, 3, negative 3/4. That coordinate is negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2. Okay? Negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, 1. Because it's your y over your x. Okay? Sine, 17 pi over 6. Well, if it was 18 pi over 6, that would be worth 3 pi, right? So let's go 1, 2, 3. But it's 1 pi over 6 short. So you're sitting right here. That coordinate is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2 positive half. How do I know? You guys just have to know your unit circle. I can't help you if you still don't have the unit circle memorized. There's nothing I can do for you. All right? Sine is your y value. Cosine is your x. Tangent is y over x. So half is being divided by, negative square root of 3 over 2. So it's a half times negative 2 over the square root of 3. The 2's cancel. You have negative 1 over the square root of 3, which is negative square root of 3 over 3 after you rationalize. Okay? If sine of theta is square root of 3 over 2, where in the unit circle would you be? Well, sine is your y value. The y is positive, so you're in the upper quadrants, quadrant 1 and 2. You're either at 60 degrees or 120 or pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. Okay? Doesn't ask how it wants the answer, so I'm doing it both ways. 60 or 120. Pi over 3, 2 pi over 3. This information on its own isn't enough to limit you to one answer. So how about if we were to tell you that sine is that, okay, so we're one of these two, and secant is less than 0. Now secant is related to cosine, and you're saying it's less than 0. So that means your x value has to be less than 0. So your x value is negative. Well, you were either here or here. The only place where your x value is negative is here. So you have to be standing at 2 pi over 3. Okay? With those two pieces of information. So find the remaining trig functions given this, and you're in quadrant 2. I expressed in the very first slide, the thing you guys should do is find your x, your y, and your radius or your r, whichever one you want to call it. Sine is when you're not on the unit circle, is your y value over your hypotenuse or your y value over your radius, whichever way you want to call it. So this is your y, this is your radius. 2, 5. And it's the Pythagorean theorem to find your missing piece. To find, in this case, x. X squared would be 425. So x is equal to the square root of 21. Okay? Sine, we got it. 2/5. Cosecant, 5/2. Cosine, square root of 21 over 5. Secant is a reciprocal, 5 over the square root of 21, which would be 5 square roots of 21 over 21. Tangent is your y over your x, 2 over the square root of 21, which would be 2 square roots of 21 over 21. And then cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, square root of 21 over 2. I'm telling you, if you guys find your x, your y, or your r first, these suckers are easy. If you fall back to the non-SOHCAHTOA definitions. If you guys fixate on and are unwilling to leave SOHCAHTOA behind, you're never going to get these. Because how do you draw your triangle? It's crazy. How do you know who's, if you're sitting over here and this is your angle, who's adjacent, who's hypotenuse, who's opposite? Oh my gosh, that's just awful. Okay. Where is tangent and cotangent defined? Okay, so first off, tangent of theta is your opposite over adjacent, or your y over your x. On the unit circle, where is it undefined? You guys have to know your basic fraction sense. The only way you're going to make a fraction undefined is if you divide by 0. So tangent is undefined when x equals 0. Where does that happen? Here and here. So it's happening at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2, or 90 and 270. Cotangent, excuse me again, is your x over your y. The only way that's ever going to be undefined is if y is equal to 0. Where does y equal 0? Here and here. So when theta equals 0 and 180, or 0 and pi, tangent's going to be undefined. Name two angles that satisfy the following conditions. Sine is a half. Sine is your y value, so you're going to be here and here. Those are the two positive locations for sine. So I'm not stipulating right this second whether it's degrees or radians, so let's do both. 3150, pi over 6, 5 pi over 6. Where's cosine negative a half? Okay, cosine is your x value, where your x is negative a half specifically, there and there, right? So that would be 120 and 240, or 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. Cosecant is this. I have no clue where that is, so I'm going to cash it in for sine. So, whoops, it's not equal. Sine of theta is equal to negative 3 over 2 square roots of 3. So that equals, if I rationalize it, square root of 3, square root of 3. So that would be negative 3 square roots of 3 over 2 times 3. So those cancel. Negative square root of 3 over 2. Where is sine negative square root of 3 over 2? Sine is your y values. Your y would be negative square root of 3 over 2 here and here. So that's going to happen at 240 and 300, or 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Where's tangent negative square root of 3? Okay. To figure this one out, tangent, because it's a fraction, y over x, you guys have to know, all right, it's got a square root of 3 in it, it's got to be a 30, or it's got to be a 60. There's no other place on the unit circle where that's true, where you got a square root of 3. The coordinate is square root of 3 over 2 a half, or a half square root of 3 over 2. And what you do is you just try one. Okay, y over x. So y over x. So it's a half times 2 over the square root of 3. And I get 1 over the square root of 3. Now the only thing that's missing, oops, sorry, this isn't it. This is the wrong one. I apologize. I thought it was that one. All right, so then it must be this one. And to prove it to you, you're dividing by a half. So that's square root of 3 over 2 times 2 over 1. So you get square root of 3. Okay, this one's negative, but at least we have the basic shape of it, that it's this one, not that one. All we have to do to make a fraction less than 0 is either this number's negative or that number's negative, but not both of them. Where does that happen? It happens in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. A multiple of 60 in quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. Well, multiple of 60 is this one and this one. So 120 and 300, 2 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. Now what I want you to notice is tangent has the answers that are diagonally opposite each other. Sine had answers that were horizontally opposite of each other, and cosine had answers that were vertically opposite each other. Okay, keep that in mind. Tangent, the answers will be opposite of each other vertically. Sine, you're going to have answers that are opposite each other horizontally. And tangent, you're going to have answers that are opposite each other diagonally. Okay. And that looks like that.